Hello, everyone. Today, I thought I would talk a little bit about scoring spirits and the work of evaluating spirits, and I thought I would dig a little bit into theology, because that's always fun. So, as you know, I use a 100-point scale, but points on their own don't particularly mean anything. So I like to lay on top of that scale a kind of heuristic that I borrow from Dave Tate, powerlifter, which is his shit to suck to good to great heuristic. I really like this way of breaking up the world, because it cuts out the middle mediocre period, which is where you land a lot of the time. You really have to decide, in Dave Tate's way of viewing the world, whether something is suck leaning up or whether it is kind of the lower side of good. So roughly speaking, on the 100-point scale, if it's below 75 points, 0 to 74, that is shit. Roughly 75 up to 82, just below 83, that is suck. 83 to 90 is good, and then anything above 90 is great. And let's walk through these. Now, you might say there's 74 points devoted. That's more than half the scale devoted to shit. And to a lot of people, fairly so, that's going to seem like a waste of points. So it's really, Scott, you're telling us it's just a 25-point scale. No. Because, if you think that's too much space in the scale for shit, have you been in a liquor store recently? Really? And not just looking at the little tiny segment of it where the stuff you're interested in lives. Look around to everything else. And you will notice that most of it, the vast majority of it, is shit. Have you tasted any buzzballs? Because I have. Have you tasted through some particularly gross additive-driven tequilas in a while? Because I have. There are layers to shit. There are different kinds of shit out there. In fact, I would venture to say there are more different kinds of shit than anything else. There is the kind of spirits that are shit because they just don't do anything, because there's nothing to them. There's the kinds of spirits that are shit because they're out of balance, because they were badly made. And then there are the ones that are just genuinely physically painful to have near you or to imbibe. If I had the time in my life, I would like to make some disambiguations of kinds of shit out there, but I don't really care that much. In any case, don't underestimate the value of the rest of that scale, 74 and south, because you can occupy that everything within that within that scale. You really could. Okay, so suck is just the stuff that is making some kind of attempt to step up from shit, right? And it's not that hard. You can change a couple of things. Throw your shit in decent barrels for a little while. Distill to a slightly lower strength. Bottle at a slightly higher strength. These little moves. These little moves will often bring shit up to suck. And then once you're in good, you're talking about actual legitimately good stuff. Now, another common objection made to the 100-point scale is that no one ever rates anything 100 points, and so the thought is, well, you're creating the scale based on 100, right? So that's the standard. But if you never actually tasted anything that is the standard, how can that create the scale? Because you never tasted. And I will say I do not think of it that way. My standard is 90. 90 is perfection. 90 is, if I taste a spirit, I'm fasting right now, but if I had a glass of something and I taste it and I feel like there's nothing more I could ask of it, that like it is just, as the kind of spirit it is doing everything that it could possibly be doing. It is nailing every single base. That is 90. And so then you might say, okay, and I do get 90s. Like I've reviewed plenty of 90s on the channel, so I know kind of what a 90 is. You may ask, well, what about great? What about how can you be better than perfect? Well, that, my pretties, is where things gets interesting, doesn't it? Because perfection is essentially just meeting the standards. It is noting the expectations and the mores and the norms of the style and just filling them out completely. It is being a perfect thing of that kind. Once you are starting to head above 90, you are beginning to think about stuff that doesn't so much exceed expectations as just kind of like brings its own rules to the table. Like at that point, you were just trying to, it becomes less of an evaluation, more of a conversation with the thing in the bottle. And yes, I know I'm getting poetic and airy and metaphorical over here. And that's because with these kinds of spirits, you have to. And it is, to some extent, their dignity, their what makes them glorious, that you can't completely follow along with them, that you really have to fight just to keep up with what they're doing. And with that, I want to talk a little bit of theology with you. Let us go to the Bible, my friends. Let us go to the book of Acts. Acts is the sequel to the Gospel of Luke. This is, so after resurrection, all that at the end of Luke, all the apostles go off into the world, and Acts is that story. But among them, you have the story of Paul, after his conversion, visiting Athens. This is Acts book 17. And this is a very, very classic text. And I'm going to read it, and you will figure out why I'm reading it to you in a moment. So this is the text where Paul goes to spread the gospel in Athens. And he goes to a place called the Areopagus, which is this big kind of stoned hill in Athens. It's still there. You can go visit. And he gives a speech because the Athenians are very curious about him because he's saying some crazy things and they want to hear what he's saying. And I start from chapter 22. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" Now this is... so this would have been an altar to that the Greeks, the Athenians, would have made to essentially the gods they missed. That if there was a god out there that they missed, and they feel very sorry, but the worshipers can go to this particular altar to worship. So think of it as like in LGBTQ plus, you have the plus. Which is there in case, there's something not covered by everything else, every other previous category. The plus is there for the excess. This is kind of the just in case there's an excess. It's the same situation here. There's an altar to an unknown God. And then Paul says, and there's a mistranslation in this. What is this? New Standard Revised? Yeah, this is New Standard Revised. The translation is very annoying, but it's very annoying in most of the translations. It reads, I'm just going to read this to you. "What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world." Yeah, so basically Paul then gives them a sort of crash course in Judeo-Christian thought. And then at the end, some of them think he's crazy. But it says, in conclusion, put a pin in this, that some of them join him and become believers, including a character named Dionysius the Areopagite. Now, back to that mistranslation. Let us go to the Greek. So this is chapter 23. The Greek for that, what they translate as "what therefore you worship as unknown." The Greek, and I'm sorry, I apologize. My Greek is not what it used to be. Is houn agnontes eusebete toto ego katangalo umin. So it's agnontes is a participle. It's a present plural participle. You would roughly translate it as you unknowers. It's the participle of to not know. So you unknowers, or even like you agnostics would be a better literal translation. So it translates something to so I preach to you, or I give you the message about that which you worship, which you unknowers worship. And it's not, a lot of translations make it seem like that Paul is sort of chastising the Athenians for not knowing what this God. You idiots, you should know exactly who this God is. No. It's actually, because he's being very nice to the Athenians here. He's actually praising them, because the way to worship the unknown God is to be an unknower. And this is not a problem. It's, okay, so this gives rise to a tradition in Christianity, although there's parallel traditions in many other sort of religious, religions, I hate the word religions, but let's use the word, other religious traditions, which kind of are right there with this, where the object of worship, God, is unknown. And it's not, there's lots of theologians who are not my favorites who want to take this as a deep problem. Oh, it would be so nice if we could know God as the angels do, or whatever. But unfortunately, we are too finite and too sinful and yada, yada, yada. But the more interesting part of that tradition is the people who say, no. To be unknown is a privilege. That is glory, to be unknown. And so the proper position to be in, going back to this passage, when you worship this God, is to not know. More than this, the unknown nature of God filters down through the creation for a lot of these things. I mean, for example, John Scotus Eriugena, for whom, God is unknown even to God's self, which is maybe not that weird a position, but it's not a position that everyone takes up. But the unknown nature of this filters down through the rest of nature. So there are things in nature that we absolutely know. We can do our science and so forth and so on. But nature per se is not known to us. And above all, the human soul is unknown to us. And again, that is the privilege, that is the dignity and the glory of the soul. And also, of course, you get this filters down to the text, the sacred texts, and you find this has very, very funny ramifications in what you might call, I have to pick a careful word here, orthodox religious tradition. And that's my word. That's an edict term. That's my word. This is just how I'm using it in Orthodox traditions. Because what you find in those traditions is a real insistence on study of the text, respect for the text, despite the fact that you will never understand it. And it's absolutely true. Like pick a book of this thing to to just read. Just read the friggin' Bible. Open it up, pick a book, start reading. I guarantee you will not get more than like 3 or 4 pages before you have to throw up your hands and say, what just happened? I have no idea what's going on. That is normal. That is how it's supposed to work. And it's not, again, it's not a problem. This is privilege. You know, the famous saying of Augustine, what is it? It's if you know it, it is not God. Right? So, and this is by the Orthodox traditions in contrast to what you might call fundamentalist traditions. Again, my word, edict word, where, yeah, it's you still have the truth. In Orthodox traditions, you have the truth. You have the true word of God, right? Maybe it's not written by God, but from God and to some extent. And the problem is you don't understand the truth. You don't know what it means. So, and this is why you have to pay attention to it and why you need to study it. Fundamentalist traditions, also, you have the truth, you have the Word of God, but it's extremely easy to understand it. Or the fundamentalists used to use the phrase literal reading. They insisted on a literal reading of the Bible. Now, if you kind of cornered them and pushed them and said, well, does that mean, when it says Jesus was the Lion of Judah, do you really think Jesus was literally a lion? They would say, no, don't be stupid. Like, that's what you moron. How could you think that? Because when they say literal reading or whatever they want to say, what they mean is the reading that comes most easily to them when they pass their eyes over the text. The reading that is most obvious to them. If someone else reads it differently or reads it and begins to have questions or confusions about what does that mean, like that is indication of some kind of problem. That is an indication of some kind of perversity. So it ends up being essentially all about, you could say, kind of tribalism and a kind of hierarchy. Essentially, the text is not essentially in its function there to be studied. It is there to be kind of held up as a way to carve up the world in nice, neat ways. And so, you don't really want to study the text that closely because you might have to start thinking about it. What you want to do is constantly refer to paraphrases, to select quotations, things like that. I'm sorry, I'm getting political here. I'm getting mean here. Anyway, so there's an important contrast between what I would call a fundamentalist tradition and an Orthodox tradition. I should have brought some water. Jesus, my mouth is drying out. And so you find in these Orthodox traditions where there is a necessary kind of intellectual humility about how to approach this thing. You find some interesting, ramifications and results. So footnote, I'm babbling too much already, but footnote. One of the things that impressed me when I first started studying this stuff was realizing that the early church fathers, particularly Justin Martyr, but also Tertullian and a couple of others, had an enormous amount of respect for the classical atheists, for the Hellenistic, Greek, and Roman atheists. Particularly Socrates was held up as a kind of great example of what you could do, partly because the Apology kind of mirrors the Passion story in lots of important ways, but also because the Church Fathers took Socrates as an atheist, as a kind of classical atheist, and this was a good thing for them. And you might say that's completely crazy. These are Christians, right? So being an atheist should be the worst possible thing. It should be an atrocity. No. Think about it. Give it some thought. Because from their perspective, let me think of it. From their perspective, someone in Athens or Greece or Rome or whoever who is sort of looking through the marketplace of the available gods on the marketplace, the available theological positions, and says, no, these are all fake. These are all made up. They're for politics. They're for wish fulfillment. They're not real. They're better to take the metal and melt it down. Better to just burn the wood as kindling. Those people are absolutely right from a Christian early church father perspective. They're absolutely right. The only problem is they didn't get the message about the possibility of this other God out here. And this is, by the way, not a unique thing. There's strains of this position running all the way up to contemporary theology. That you don't worry about the atheists. Just they're not the problem. Worst case, these are relatively decent people who are very rightfully, setting aflame the idols out there, and they just haven't gotten the message. And that's fine. Much better to be that than to be someone outright distorting the message. Because, again, remember, with Orthodox traditions, the problem is not atheism or even like other religions, it's heresy. That's another discussion, though. Anyways, back to my point. So yeah, there's this enormous respect for what is unknown, for what is because it is the unknown, let's say, super knowable nature of it that makes it so glorious and so important. And the text to look at this for that is, I think this. Go pick up The Mystical Theology by this character who's often called Pseudo-Dionysius, and it's an unfair name. So around the early to mid-6th century, you started to see discussion and commentary of texts, a collection of texts by an author called Dionysius. And the tradition immediately kind of connected this to that biblical character I just mentioned, the guy who got converted by Paul in Athens, Dionysius the Areopagite. It's going to be the same guy, right? No. People pretty quickly figured out it couldn't have been him, because there's just stuff going on in these texts that post-date that period of the very early church. But so they stick the name pseudo on this guy, but there's nothing fake about him. He's not pretending. There's no moment in here when he's pretending to be Dionysius the Areopagite. More likely, this is a monk or a thinker who just took up this name, which was not uncommon, just to perhaps because it reflected the concerns found in this passage about the unknown gods, right? So mystical theology is sometimes in the tradition called negative theology, but of course the negation part is only it's only part of the story. Like the thought here is the mystical theology of Dionysius, which is a very short text. It's a couple of pages. Tons of fun, especially if you are a heavy metal fan or a goth fan, or a Christian for that matter. That's not the worst thing. Definitely worth a read. I just lost my train of thought. So, right. So, what you get in this text is a progression. Theology in this era does not mean theologia in, say, Thomas Aquinas, divine science, science of God, and anything like that. It's God talk. It's the the logos, the logos of God. So it's a much, much broader set of concerns. And Dionysius is concerned to here to give you a progression of theology, if you like, starting with affirmation, then negation, and then the mystical theology. So affirmation, saying all you can about God, but knowing at the end you will fail. Like everything you could possibly say is going to be inadequate. You say God is good, and that's correct. That's not wrong to some extent. But it's also deeply inadequate to speak about the source of all goodness as good. So you move to the negative way. You deny all the things about God. Also knowing that none of this will be true. So you can say God is not finite, and that is correct, but it is still not adequate to the thing. At the end is the mystical, which is not another way to affirmation or anything like that. And Dionysius really doesn't say that much about it, but the best is this passage right towards the beginning, where eventually he starts talking about Moses. And he says the good cause of all is neither word nor active understanding, since it is on a plane above all this, and it is made manifest only to those who travel through foul and fair, who pass beyond the summit of every holy ascent, who leave behind them every divine light, every voice, every word from heaven, and who plunge into the darkness where, as Scripture proclaims, there dwells the one who is beyond all things. So there's a process of purification goes on there. And then he applies this to the character of Moses in Exodus. He talks about this process of purification Moses goes to until eventually Moses reaches, he says, the heights of those holy places which the mind at least can rise. And Dionysius goes on. But then he, Moses, breaks free of them, away from what he sees and is seen, and he plunges into the truly mysterious darkness of unknowing. Here, renouncing all that the mind may conceive, wrapped entirely in the intangible and the invisible, he belongs completely to him who is beyond everything. Here, being neither oneself nor someone else, one is supremely united to the completely unknown by an inactivity of all knowledge and knows beyond the mind by knowing nothing. Again, it's metal. This is very fun. Divine darkness and all that. So it's not an additional step of God talk, of speaking. This is the mystical theology. Once you reach this point, is what the kids would call vibing. It is to be together in the darkness with the source of all light, so to speak. And that is about all he says about this. There's a little bit more, but that is most. So that is the right way to approach the privileged object of our unknowing. It isn't ultimately about developing one's knowledge to a superhuman capacity or something like that. It is about vibing. It's about a pursuit, a kind of self-purification, trying to chase along with this thing that is to the point of just being in darkness at the end of the day, and that being the best possible outcome. Back to spirits and scoring. This is where you are. You were on this road when you were above 90 points. At this point, I mean, you can absolutely still affirm things. It tastes like this. It tastes like this, and so on. You can absolutely still deny things. It's not that. It's not that. It's not that. But there's a certain inadequacy to all of that. There's a way in which words fail, and at a certain point, you're just spouting poetry or nonsense or something like that. It's where I usually go when I start talking about really good Mars or really high Esther Hamden. I just start to blabber because there's nothing else to do, because I'm trying to follow this thing into the darkness. Now, 100-point score would be I suppose, divinity itself. It would be the divine darkness itself. So I don't have any expectation that I will ever get there. But I do think there is a measure and a worth of having a place in the scale for things that are just moving beyond me to a certain degree, that I have to score to the extent that I don't get quite what they're doing. I'm amazed by it. I am stunned and I lose sleep over it, but I don't quite get it. The best I can do is try to catch up and vibe a little bit. And I think that's about all I have to say about that. So, yeah, I mean, this is a fun read. Thank you for humoring me. I don't know if this clarifies my way of thinking about scoring or further obfuscates it, but that's what I got. So I'm going to be able to eat again in a few hours, and I would like to pour something extremely good for myself at that time. Thanks for watching, and cheers.